Hello everybody and welcome into my latest live video. My name is CareyHolzman and today it is the 7th of September 2023 and we've got a little mini ITX build for you utilizing some older parts. I've had, as I mentioned numerous times in the past, I've got a number of prepped motherboards that are sitting in the other room waiting for cases, and I've procrastinated putting them in cases because I don't know who they're going to go to, and the person who's buying it might want a specific kind of case or a specific size power supply, depending on if they intend to add a GPU or other things. So they kind of sit. And in the past, they've naturally sold without me trying to sell them. But lately, I've been building them faster than I can sell them, or throughout, I should say, 2021 and 2022, a lot of motherboards were prepped. And while most of them I've sold, I still have a few left over. Now, a viewer of the channel, Ryan in Nevada, had sent this MSI H310i Pro motherboard with the 9600K i5 processor. And I've added RAM and storage and hadn't decided what I was going to do with it. Well, it's been sitting for, well, this was originally at Studio A, so it's been at least 3 years, and thought it would come up in something, and it never has. So I went online trying to find an inexpensive mini ITX case. Not that we have to use a mini ITX case. A larger case will typically be compatible. It just looks ridiculous to have a little tiny motherboard in a big case. But quite often, it can be cheaper to buy the bigger cases than the smaller cases. So, long story short, I ended up finding a case I really liked that turned out into a whole new build, which is the opposite of me getting rid of parts. I ended up building a whole new system with that coffee maker looking machine, when the whole point was I was trying to find a cheap ITX case for this motherboard. So after that squirrel moment, went back and started looking at Amazon and Newegg. Those are my two primary sources for cases, and saw this case from RAIJINTEK. They make the case Mitch and I built. That's the long, looks like a console case. Looks like an old 1960s console. And it's still in the back room. I never finished it because we needed some extension cables, which I ordered and came in a long time ago, and said I'll get back to that later. Anytime a system doesn't have a customer that it goes to, then it's a channel project and it gets worked on when I'm in the mood. So that's out of sight and out of mind when it's in the other room and it's not somewhere where I'm walking by it or have to walk around it. Forget about it. So when I saw the name of this case manufacturer, I knew they made good quality cases based on previous experience. And they had this in numerous colors. I think the red is no longer available. I think black and silver, maybe white. I don't remember. But it was like $70, which honestly is a good price for a case of this quality in mini ITX. And so the motherboard and the CPU, they were just sitting around. There's nothing wrong with them. I just I don't know what to do with it. But one of the things I do know is it will have to go in a case. And one of the things I liked about this case is it will take a full-size ATX power supply. So I'm not limited to the small form factor power supplies. And you'll notice the power supply is going to go into the bottom, and on the back of the case, got the plug here, which on many of these mini ITXs, you'll see very common that it's basically an extension cable. There's an internal cable that runs from the back of the plug that you're going to plug in inside of the computer to the back of the power supply. On top of that, the folks at Be Quiet sent me the Pure Rock LP heatsink. Because they had reached out to me and asked if I'd be interested in reviewing some stuff. And I said, whatever you want to send me, I'm happy to review. So I didn't even know this was coming. And then when it arrived, even though I said that, I'm happy to review whatever you send me, it's like, what am I going to use this on? Because clearly you can't cool a very hot processor with a heatsink this small. Well, it turns out you can't really put a big heatsink in a mini ITX case. Oftentimes they're too big. You can't close the panels. This will do 100 watt TDP, and I'm not sure on the 9600K. It's an i5. Don't believe it's 100 watt, but you got someone can look it up for me. But I think that's going to work well here. Keep it low profile. We're not using a liquid cooler or anything, even though this does have a little window on the side. It's a small window. And I thought it was an attractive case. It looks like it's got an RGB fan there in the back. And it's like brushed aluminum. It's a really nice look. It's got like a vent here on top. It's a nice, clean, minimalist look. We got two USB 3.0s. Got a headphone and microphone 3.5 millimeter jack separated out. And power buttons right there in the middle. So there's no reset switch. I don't see a hard drive LED. My guess is there's a power LED that lights up around the button. We'll find out. We're going to build it together. The motherboard's already been prepped. It was prepped a long time ago. So this motherboard looks like it's got 16 gigs of DDR4 G-Skill rip jaws. The aforementioned i5 9600K CPU. And we've got some kind of NVMe drive. This looks like an OEM Samsung drive. This is a PM961. I don't see a size, but I'm going to guess it's probably 500 gigs. Because, 3 years ago, 500 gig NVMe drive was probably somewhere around $50, $60. Of course, today they're half that, but that's what it was built with, and that's why. So I'm thinking this cooler on this board in this case, and then I just have to grab a power supply. The power requirements on this should be simple, so I'm thinking maybe just a cheap EVGA 500 watt. I could go modular, could be beneficial in a small case like this to not have all the cables to deal with. So I'll have to look back at my inventory to see if I have a lower wattage modular power supply to use. That's why a lot of the parts list has not been filled out. Many of these parts aren't even available for sale anymore. This is an MSI H310i Pro motherboard. I doubt you could find one for sale. The CPU is still sold. You could still go to Amazon and buy a 9600K. And the RAM is probably, the Ripjaws RAM is pretty popular from G-Skill. That might still be sold today. But the motherboard, the main heart of the system, we're looking at technology that's at least 4 years old. So likely inventory's long since gone. So this is just for the experience of the build. When it's done, it will be available for sale. If somebody wants a lower priced mini ITX system, you can reach out to me at my email address and we'll handle any transactions or offers privately. Hello to all my friends in the chat room. Welcome in. And I just lost my chat room. Give me a second here. Where did it go? Right there. Hello to Darren Gilholm and Paul Garrett, Mark Baggett and Gil Garcia, Paul O'Brien and Essential Working Too Hard, Mark Gaines and Douglas Burchell, John Paul Bacon and Randy Robluski. Hello to Ron Barnish and Scotty, Andy Kane and Nick Poverman, our friend Oystein, all the way from Norway. Zach Bischoff saying hello to me and Camera Girl in the chat room. There's our friend Thomas Backenstow and Bob R., as well as Martin Wolferts. Utomo says hello. Jim KJ3N, Fran Justor, Sub-Zero, Eddie Casanova, Doman 2000, all saying hello. There's Alan Lindus, Planet Cryos, Gerhard Huff, Rip City Raider, and Peter and Kevin Doan all say hello, as does Chris Smith and Sherry McFarland and George Ferrugia. Michael Dane, he's the man. He pops in and says hello. So welcome in. Thanks, you guys, for being on time. No late fees. Speaking of that, I want to just check and see before we get started if I'm missing anybody. Take a real quick look. Hello to my friend Bill Leatherland watching us in the UK. And the folks over at Be Quiet, after we built yesterday's system in the Be Quiet case, I think the controller board that's in the top of the bezel that controls the, it's got the buttons, the power button and the USB, all that's controlled by a little circuit board. I believe something's fried on that circuit board. It may have even been my fault for attaching that bezel with the power on. But they're going to see about sending me a new circuit board. I don't want them to send me the whole front bezel. In fact, the circuit board's not even a part of the front bezel. It's a separate part of the case. I think just swapping that board out should be relatively simple and we'll fix our RGB issues. I also asked if they wanted to send one of their big 360-degree coolers. That's RGB. We'll put it in that case, as well as there was one other thing. Oh, their power supply. So that'll be a Be Quiet build. So yesterday's build with the Be Quiet case, we'll have a follow-up video where we swap out the Mugen 5 for an RGB 360 millimeter radiator from Be Quiet. And we'll pull that power supply and swap it with a power supply from Be Quiet as well. And hopefully we get that controller board and the whole thing will be done. That one will have to be sold locally. It's so big, it's so heavy, it's going to cost $200 to ship that, which is going to make it very cost prohibitive to sell. The only one making any money on that's going to be the shipper. But do know, if you want to get a Be Quiet case, you're getting a big, heavy, soundproofed, well-constructed case. And so really can appreciate the free shipping being offered by Amazon, Newegg, or B&H Photo, where I typically will buy cases because just shipping that case can cost as much as the case cost. I kid you not. And that's when it's empty and doesn't have parts in it. So anyway, in a couple of weeks' time, I imagine we can revisit that and finish that build up to a level I think is deserving of a build of that quality. That's a 10900K processor, which is the 10th gen flagship. So why not use Be Quiet's one of their flagship cases and coolers to have it all match, and power supplies at all top tier. So my thanks to the folks at Be Quiet for sending the units for review. Oystein says he loves free Amazon shipping, even to Norway. Yeah, I imagine that shipping could get expensive. Kenton Morton says, I'm going to build a system in that same case. I'm ordering now using your link. So my link taking you to Newegg is not a commission-based link. You don't have to use, it's only the Amazon links or like RoboForm if you want the discount, or a Cronus. I don't have any affiliation with Newegg. So just so you know, if I post any Newegg links, it's because there is no Amazon link. Amazon doesn't sell it. And it's not really important. My priority is to make sure you can order the part. That's my first priority. My second priority is to make a commission on it, but that's not always possible. But I'm not going to withhold a link because I'm not making commission on it, just so you know. If that's the only place you can get the part, and that's where I got the part, was Newegg, then that's the link I'm going to provide. And just because it's a link, I don't want... Available on Amazon in silver. Yeah, not in red. Yeah. Thank you. Is it in white too? Just black and silver? Okay. So just because you see a link in my video notes, don't automatically assume that's always for profit. Sometimes it's there specifically for your benefit. But I appreciate the thought. I really do. Let's see. Buck D1CH says, morning from Australia, just about to start work. Well, welcome in. Good day, I guess I should say. Scott Loosemore says, hello, Carey. Nice looking case. And Knight Rider also says hello. Yeah, I thought this is easily $100 case from the way it looks. And with my experience with the other RAIJINTEK case that Mitch and I built in, I was impressed with the quality of this company I never heard of before. And let's see, John Paul Bacon says, when I bought my Cooler Master HAF XB Evo computer case from Amazon, the free shipping was a lifesaver. I couldn't imagine having to pay for shipping on that monster case. Yeah. Yeah, well, you can certainly appreciate it when you have to ship it. People take free shipping for granted. They don't really understand the box cost money that you ship it in. I typically pay $20 to FedEx for the box and packing material to ship a standard mid-sized tower computer. That's in addition to the $120 I'm paying to ship. So added together, it's commonly about $140, $150 now. And that shipping price goes up the first week of October as they present holiday rates. Because of the demand on shipping, they raised the price. Sort of like peak hours for, what did Uber calls that something, when you want to call an Uber during certain very busy hours, the Uber rate is higher. Surge rate. Yeah, thank you, Buck. Yeah, the surge rate. All right, so I've never worked with this case before. I'm going strictly off of looks and price. It looked like a good deal. And just looking at it, I see 4 screws here and the same on the other side. I think we start by removing those screws. They're very small Phillips. I'm going to guess my JIS, Japanese Industrial Standard Phillips screwdriver. It's probably going to be a good fit here. I also see 2 screws here. Well, let's go ahead and start here. And that screwdriver actually doesn't fit in there as well as I thought it would. It feels a little loose. How about a standard number 2 Phillips? Oh, that actually fits better. I'm surprised, but in a good way. Okay, 1, 2, and then 2 more. Let's do it this way. Maybe you guys can see a little bit here. Now the side panels are going to be different. One side panel has a clear panel. Won't do you much good to put that on the wrong side of the case. So for future reference, we know that we're taking the non-windowed side panel that has the holes. It's going to go on the left side when the case is facing me, or I suppose if it were facing you, this would be the left panel. And we'll come around the other side here and we'll take off the other panel. That should get us a very nice look inside. Kind of curious what cable management's going to be like. It's always a concern in many ITX cases. Smaller case, obviously, not going to have as much room for excess cables and slack. Some do better than others, but they're usually always a struggle. Therefore, a modular power supply may be ideal. That way we only have to use the cables we need and don't have to tie up the other cables. All right, there's our clear panel. It looks like the whole thing comes apart, surprisingly. I'm curious how the front comes off. What is holding the front on? It looks like we can unscrew every panel. I do not see a rivet on this case. Let's face it, when a manufacturer chooses to use rivets, they could have just as easily used screws. And the difference is rivets sometimes break and then your case can get wobbly. We saw that on the cheap Kadairs case I reviewed last year. And on this one, it looks like we've got screws all along the panels for the top, the bottom, and on the inside here. Looks like a very shallow screw will drive in to hold this front panel on if we wanted to take it off. And that would make working on this so much easier, right? Obviously, when you're dealing with a micro ATX case, you're going to be working in a confined space. Having small hands helps, but sometimes even, small hands aren't enough. Sometimes the parts themselves fit in just within millimeters, if that. Even the top grill up here has screws around it, so this can be removed. This whole top panel looks like it can be removed. The bottom can be removed. And there appears to be a drive tray in here. We've got documentation. And they have zip tied This is interesting. We have a button right here. I wonder if that's to control the RGB. It's just a button that's hanging off. It does not appear that it fell out of something. It's just a raw button. Very strange. So what I need to do is get my wire cutters here, and we're going to cut off the zip tie. Usually they use twist ties to hold everything together. Oh, that is a twist tie. All right, so we have a twist tie. That's got a little speaker to plug into our motherboard. We've got screws, and we have, 2 nylon zip ties. How useful. I'll take them. But still, 2? Really? Inside here, oh, this is interesting. I've never seen this before. The USB 3 header has a USB 2 split. You cannot use both of these, but what I'm guessing is if you have an older motherboard that doesn't support USB 3, that these 2 ports then can plug in with this connector instead to become USB 2. I've never seen a manufacturer do that they've spun off a USB 2 connector off of the wiring. You will use one or the other. You will not use both. In theory, you would want to use the USB 3 preference. That would be your priority. But I suppose if you had something else using your USB 3 and you didn't care if these were a bit slower, you could use one of the USB 2 headers. Typically, motherboards will give you at least one of each. That's interesting. I've never seen that before. And then we've got our front port audio, right? That's going to control the headphone and microphone jack up front. And then we've got, we do have a hard drive LED, a power LED, and a power switch. There's no reset switch. And then we have our little power supply extension cable. And again, the power supply is going to fit vertically right in here, right? Not the back there. And then this extension cable makes it so that we can plug the power cable in, right? Because our power supply is way over here, but our power plug is here in the back. And that's how they're able to cram everything in such a small case, by just moving some items around from their traditional common location. Jetski SX contributes $5 in Super Chat. He says, I just found your channel and I enjoy your videos. Well, welcome in, Jetski SX. Thank you for the contribution, and I hope you'll join us in future videos and become a regular member of our chat room. We're always looking for more like-minded individuals to grow this amazing community that we have. So thank you again and welcome aboard. Now, all M-ITX motherboards, they take 4 screws to mount the board, 1 in each corner. So most often the standoffs are already installed, which they are on this motherboard tray here, motherboard tray. And it does look like we've got a place to mount a 2.5-inch drive right over here. It would have to be really slim, or I guess we could mount it on the inside. That actually looks like a 3.5-inch vertical mount for a 3.5-inch drive. I'll bet you the instructions will tell us. Let's take a look at how decent these instructions are. RAIJINTEK, creating passion. This case is called the Metis Plus, M-E-T-I-S Plus. And it gives us a description of the accessories that's included with the box, the types of screws and how many. Then a whole bunch of words and a whole bunch of pictures. And the pictures do show you can put 2 wait a minute, 2.5-inch drive. They're all 2.5-inch. There's no 3.5-inch, but it will hold up to 2 of them. No, wait a minute. There is a 3.5-inch drive installation. I'm going to bring this up to the camera so you can see it. It's mostly all pictures anyway. And depending on which picture you start looking at first, I didn't see the 3.5-inch drive install until yeah. So it shows 3.5-inch drive install here and 2.5-inch drive installs down there. And that's pretty much all of your instructions. The rest of this is just, I don't know, disclaimers, I guess. I don't know what that says. Precautions and warranty information repeated in numerous languages over and over and over again. And then, like I say, an inventory right down here of the screws that are included, how they're described, and the quantity therein. Overall, pretty straightforward, which is what I was hoping. So I think my first quest is going to be to pick a power supply to use in this. Now, it does appear if the power supply is going to sit vertically with all the cables facing up, that I could bundle all the extra cables in a wad here, zip tie them, and depending on where this window falls, you may not be able to see it. So if this window is going to go this way, then the reason why the window stops there is so you can hide all your cables back behind this piece. But I prefer to use a modular power supply so I don't have to do as much work to hide the cables. Or grower says I build one that was green. They did have numerous colors of this. I don't recall seeing green, but I wouldn't be surprised. Let me go back here and see if I have a modular lower power. I don't want to waste a 750 watt power supply unless we're adding a graphics card to this. We're going to use the onboard video for today's build. So I have a 550 that looks modular. There's a 500. Is the 500 GD modular? I don't think it is. Take a quick look here. I have a bunch of power supplies here, brand new in a box from EVGA. They were on sale some time back. And power supplies very rarely depreciate. And it's a standard that, it's been the same for like 25 years. So it's a pretty safe investment for me to have an inventory. Other parts like RAM and storage and motherboards and CPUs, they all depreciate too quickly to store them in inventory. They're almost always going to be a loss where I would have to sell them for less than I paid for them. And the longer I have them in inventory, the more of a loss it is for me. But with power supplies and cases, those are generally pretty safe purchases, as far as running a business goes. I know some people want to buy their computer as they can afford each piece. And the problem with that is by the time you get the last piece, it might be obsolete and worth far less than if you would have just saved your money and bought all those parts at once. But it is safe, as I mentioned, to go ahead and purchase your power supply and your case, because those prices pretty much stay pretty flat. I'm just trying to figure out if this is modular or not. This is not a modular power supply, so let me go back to the other room and take another look. See if I can find one that's modular. I think they're all going to be higher wattage, which again, not a deal killer, but probably a bit overkill for today's build. Let's go take a look here. Modular. I've got a 650 GS. I have a NZXT 550 bronze. Oh, this looks semi-modular. That means it's got just the motherboard power cables built in. The rest of the cables are optional. Every build needs motherboard power, so there's no sense making those cables modular. Well, one good reason of having those modular is, let's say your power supply dies and you get the exact same power supply. You can just unplug all the cables without doing any cable management. switch the power supply and plug the same cables back into it, and you're back up and running in no time. For semi-modular, you'd have to do some cable management. But if you change manufacturers of power supply, you'd have to redo that. That only applies if you're getting the exact same manufacturer. And power supplies don't go out as often as they used to. So it's not like that's a common repair these days. Let's see. This should be ideal. I like the quality of these NZXT power supplies. And so far, not that I've used that many of them, but I've never had one go bad yet. Yeah, there's our modular cables. NZXT support card there. Protective foam. That's it. That'll be perfect. Perfect. Couldn't have planned that better. I think these were on sale and I bought like half a dozen of them. Like I got like 3 550s and 3 650s. And they've been sitting on a shelf just waiting for a project like this to pop up, or maybe a customer repair. If I have parts in inventory, I can get the repair done faster. The customer can be back up and running faster. Everybody's happy. And as I mentioned, there's not much depreciation with a power supply, if any. Sometimes the exact opposite. Sometimes the power supplies are worth more than what I paid for them. That's pretty rare in this industry, but it does happen from time to time. Generally speaking, parts depreciate. So anytime a part gets worth a little bit more, I'll take it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't feel bad about it. It doesn't compensate for the losses, but it helps. So it looks like we're going to put this, let me see here. It's got to go down here. Now, obviously, when you're installing a drive, we cannot install the drive on this side or it would hit the power supply. So the drive would have to be installed on the back side of this, which I guess is why it's recessed inward a little bit. But that's going to not give you a whole lot of room to close this panel. Now, me personally, I'm only going to use an M.2 drive anyway. But I suppose a thin M.2 is what that's meant for. And then I see another tray right up at the top, right up there. Right where my finger is, there's a drive tray right there. And it looks like you will take these 2 screws out from the side, on each side, and then that drive tray pops out, and you can install a drive in that. And that's your 3.5-inch drive tray. That's exactly what that is. Okay. There's also a little cable management loop right under there, which is nice. Let me bring this up close to the camera. You guys get a close-up of this. So you can see the drive tray up there. And you can see, well, if we go right up through here, right back there, you can see the this metal loop, and that's for running your cables behind. Our power supply is going to stick up vertically. It's a nice clean case. And then where you see these holes, this is for mounting more drives on the floor of the case. So it looks like you can put a 2.5-inch drive back here, two 2.5-inch drives on the floor down here by the power supply, and a 3.5-inch drive up there. That's impressive for a little case to be able to hold 5 drives all at the same time. I wouldn't, but you can. It's nice to have options, that's all I'm saying. Now, when it comes to installing the power supply, it does appear that you can take this power supply tray out and then attach this power supply frame, if you will, not a tray, it's a frame, outside of the case and then install it, but I can't see why that would make things... I don't understand why anybody would think that's easier. Sounds much more difficult to me. And you can see that our extension cable, interestingly, our extension cable is not internal like I thought it was. It's going to come out below your power supply and then plug in. That's a shame. I was hoping it was internal because visually that's not that appealing. Not, again, that anybody's really looking at the back of the case. This is actually the bottom of the case. No one's looking at the bottom. And obviously that's got to recess in deep enough because you don't want this poking out beyond the depth of the feet where it'll wobble. It won't sit flat. So I'm assuming that's recessed in just enough that this has all been thought of. This is on a right angle for that purpose. We plug into the back of the power supply. And again, nobody's going to see it. It's going to be sitting on it, essentially. I'm fine with that. Makes sense. So let's see, how are we going to do this? I'm going to try and work within the case as much as possible, but as I mentioned, it does appear that all of the panels come off. Doesn't look like it would be that big of a deal. 2 screws here, 2 screws on the back, 2 screws on the other side, and this whole bottom piece looks like it'll come off. Or we can just take the power supply frame out, 2 screws here, and the 2 screws that are also holding the feet in should release that frame. Then we can mount the frame. But either way, I think it's about the same amount of work. It does seem like getting to the screw behind this foot will require the removal of the foot at the very least. Let's see. Let's just try it and see. If I have to disassemble it, I will, but I'm going to try and do this in the simplest way possible. So the power supply, we generally want the cable to go out by the motherboard tray, just universally in all builds, because I'm thinking, you know, would it go in this way or would it go in that way? It wouldn't make sense for the power supply cables to come out and then have to run them over the power supply back to the board. It's a much cleaner install, to put it this way. It'll work equally the same. The other problem would be, this is a fan that draws in air. And if we put the power supply in this way, the fan will be up against this panel. Well, not literally, be a little bit of a gap. But this way, we'd be open to the whole internal of the computer. That does mean you're drawing in the warmer air from the case, but it shouldn't matter to the power supply. Unless you're really pressing on that power supply hard. Let's see what this looks like here if I dry fit it. Oh, plenty of room. So that's going to look like that. So for us to mount that, I'm going to need some screws. So let's take a look. We should probably use the screws that came with the power supply, which I'm going to guess are in this bag, maybe? Yeah, they are. So you can use the screws that come with the case, but as a system builder, I generally use the screws that come, if a component comes with screws, whatever that component is, I generally prefer the screws that are included with the component unless they don't color match. But in this case, black power supply with black screws. There was a while where we were getting black power supplies that came included with silver screws. And if you've watched this channel, you remember me complaining about that over and over until I eventually went and bought some screws on Amazon. These are standard X-head computer screws that are common in most builds. And yeah, let's see if we can figure out how to mount this. I think it's going to take 3 hands because effectively I need to set this up and hold it in place. There. Get one hole lined up. You need to hold the power supply straight or you might put the screw in on an angle and cross thread it. So just that one screw is going to make holding it a little easier. And then I want to put a screw in the opposite corner at the top. And then I shouldn't need to hold it at all. Those 2 screws should then allow me to be hands off and the power supply be locked in, aligned with the mounting holes. So you just got to get past those first 2. One on the top corner and one on the bottom corner at the opposite edge, opposite side. See if I can't work with gravity here to help me. Maybe I should use my electric driver to make this a little less painful. You know, wear my glasses because it's dark and the hole is small. There. If I can hold that still. No, I had to let it go to get the screw on. Do this again. I've got to align it. Like so. And once it's aligned, just hold it in position so I can get the screw in there. It may be easier to take that frame out and do it that way, but I enjoy a challenge. There we go. Okay, so to give you some idea here, that's going to look like that. And then this power cable is going to go in like so. Make sure it seats all the way in, and it should recess in deeper than the case legs are tall. That way the case sits flat. I've only put in 2 of the 4 screws. I've got to put the other 2 in. I just wanted to jump ahead a little bit and get an idea visually how that was going to fit. That looks good to me. Chris wants to know, is the stream in DVR mode? No, unfortunately, we've had viewers who don't understand DVR mode, and they end up watching the stream 30 minutes behind and leaving comments and getting angry that their comments are getting ignored because they fail to realize they're not watching the current timeline. And when that starts occurring, I'll turn DVR mode off to avoid the viewers who don't understand the way YouTube works. So today, because of the events that have been taking place recently with confused viewers, we have turned DVR mode off, but you will be able to watch the video in full once we're done today. But this way it ensures all viewers are watching the exact moment equally. We don't have one viewer 10 minutes behind, another viewer 20 minutes behind, another viewer 7 minutes behind. All of you are current, and that means your comments will be in line. Unfortunately, until the viewers get to understand how YouTube works better, we have to do this to avoid unnecessary confusion. Generally speaking, I will run it without DVR mode for a few videos, and then we'll try DVR mode again. But as we gain new viewers, the whole thing starts over again. So, you know, it's just a reaction to misunderstanding that's completely avoidable by the viewer if they bothered to take the time. And since we can't control that, we can't control educating the viewer. So if we don't give the viewer that option, then that avoids a whole scenario that can develop. And I've been seeing it a little too much. If it happens once, it doesn't bother me. But when it starts happening over and over again, I shut DVR mode down. You'll watch live, and anything you miss, you can go back afterwards and watch. Now, like I said, that may not stay. We'll see how it goes today. Now, let's see. I want to put the final 2 screws in here. So let's go ahead and get that done before I forget. Oh, I already put one in there. Go down here. I think this one I'm going to have to use my manual driver. It's a tight fit in there. You know, it may be so tight I have to take it out to get the screws in now that I'm taking a look at it. It looks like, well, you know what? Maybe I just need to loosen the 2 screws I put in so the power supply can be just slightly moved up a little bit. Maybe that's all I need to do. Let's try that. Bring it up this way. Need to push the power supply. Yeah, it's a little to the right, so I need it to go this way a little bit. It's not budging, which either means the screws are still too tight or I have to take the frame out. It's really close though. Oh, okay. It's actually just needing the power supply needs to be tilted, and that's what's aligning the screw now. Much better. That's another reason why you shouldn't tighten down the screws until all of them are at least started. Now, this last screw has to go. Oh, you know what? Maybe we can get in there without removing the foot. Oh, it's a tight fit. But hey, that's standard on a mini ITX case. It's always going to be a tight fit by the very nature. Well, I'm not going into the right. So looks like it's in the right spot. Maybe it's cross-threading. That's a little tricky. So the foot is in the way, so I will have to take the foot out. Now I can see it better. So taking the frame out is an alternate way of installing this, which might be a little easier for some of you, or maybe a preferred installation method. So it can be done without removing the frame, as I've just proven. We tighten down those 4 screws and we can put the foot right back on again. Let's see, that was where. Oh, the foot has a little nub that sticks out. So the nub goes in the hole, and that's going to align the screw with the hole underneath. That makes sense. It's well thought out. Now, if you over tighten these feet, it looks like you're just going to squish them down. So you want them to be secured, but don't over tighten them. You'll know. You'll see it start to squish, and it'll bend. It'll start bending the foot, and then your case will wobble. It won't sit flat. So that's the installation of the power supply. That's what it looks like so far. You can already see it's looking crowded. We haven't even put the motherboard in yet. Ben Laird, joining us from Scotland, contributes £5 in Super Chat. Thank you, Ben. Power cable will obviously go with, that'll go in the motherboard box. I'll give you a nice close-up of this board. I'll bring this up to the camera here. This is an older board, as I mentioned. It was sent to us from Ryan, a viewer in Nevada, who sent us a number of things, and we've sent Ryan a number of things back in return. Nah, we're fine. So that's what we're working with. It's an older MSI 300 series chipset. Nothing wrong with it. We've got display port out and DVI out, but no HDMI from the looks of things. 2 USB 2s, 2 USB 3s, gigabit Ethernet, a keyboard and mouse plug up there, another USB 2, and then our audio, the green is speakers, red is microphone, blue is a line input. And then that's our NVMe storage that's in here, which is an OEM Samsung. Could be 256, could be 512, I'm not sure. And then, of course, you can see our 2 SATA ports, one side of the RAM and 2 SATA ports on the other side. So this can accommodate 4 drives. The case can accommodate 4 drives. And the RAM is red and the case is red. That all just realized that's purely coincidental. Roman 2000 said it's a good thing the DVR mode is off. Even sometimes I accidentally rewind when refreshing or moving windows. Yeah, well, that would explain how some of the confusion happens. PCS Computers Missouri says hello. Dan Nilsson saying hello. Mats Olov joins us from Sweden. Tej Singh says, hey, Carey and family. John Inglis recommends an extractor fan on top in micro ATX cases, especially with a down-facing CPU fan. I've not found that to be true, but I guess it depends on which CPU you're running. Obviously, a lower wattage CPU, an i5, an i3, even some models of i7s are lower wattage. They don't generate that level of heat. And probably a fan is not necessary. It looks like, just take a look at this top grill here. They don't really afford you an opportunity for a fan up on top. It's just a vent. You're only going to have one fan in this case, and it's this one. It's blowing air out. It's going to naturally pull air in through the openings in the case, which likely is this top here, would be my guess, because I don't see any other vents. Oh, well, the side panel on the left side has vents. So my guess is the air is going to come in this way. And then, oh, you know, I just realized something. This fan on the back is going to blow air this way. And this fan on the power supply is going to blow, it's going to draw air in. So both of these fans, these two fans face each other in opposite directions. So it looks like air is going to be pulled in from the top and from the back here. And then it's going to be split, and half of it or so is going to go through the power supply and be exhausted out the bottom, and the other half will be exhausted out the back. Adding a top fan would likely interrupt that flow, even if we could. Also, you'll see where this vent is right by the very top of the PCI slots where a graphics card would go. There's no room. If you put a fan in there, you would not be able to put a graphics card in because of the depth of the fan. So I would not build an i9 or a high wattage, high-end CPU in a mini ITX case unless you can use liquid cooling. And if you're going to use liquid cooling, again, the ventilation for the fans is not as important. So here you don't really have a choice. It's going to be a rear fan. So as long as we're building something modest, heat won't be an issue. The obsession with heat on the internet never fails to amaze me. In my career of over 30 years as a professional in this industry, I've only fixed a handful of real computer problems that were related to heat. All these other heat-related problems people on the internet have are either caused through overclocking or overvolting, or they're purely imaginary and speculative. It's way blown out of proportion to the reality. People will talk about things on the internet as though it's a real problem, like data vanishing off SSDs or hard drives that sit a long time. It's never happened. It's never happened. It's all theoretical. And while people have lost data, they're presuming why they lost it. They don't have any evidence that it just magically vanished. It's never been proven to be a reality. It's only theoretical, but people talk about it like it's a problem. People talk about heat like it's a common problem, but I can tell you as a professional in this industry, and what reason would I have to lie? It's rarely ever a problem in real life, except if it's self-inflicted through overclocking and overvolting. Otherwise, it's purely imaginary. It's anxiety at its best. It's fear, F-E-A-R, false expectations appearing real. People are very concerned about something that doesn't exist. You might as well be prepared for the chupacabra. I mean, some people are. But consider the source of information. We're not going to have any heat problems with this. Now, I'm interested to see if, speaking of that, if this cooler is going to fit okay. I think it will. This is a brand new cooler from Be Quiet. This is an old motherboard. Not really good to blend new parts and old parts, except where cases are concerned. New cases working with old parts is fine. Putting new parts in old cases usually means you're not going to have the latest USB ports. You may not have a Type-C or even USB 3 on an older case. So you can usually add those where they're already on the back of the board, but just not up front. That's the only downside of using an older case with newer parts. But as far as a newer case with older parts, instead of an older case with newer parts, really no downside to that. Let me see, i5 9600K, what's our TDP on that? Did anybody ever say what that was in the chat room? Let's see, do a quick Google search. Looks like we got 258 people watching around the world right now. Welcome in again. If it's your first time here, this is all unscripted, unrehearsed, and live. We show in real time how long it takes, the real problems, and the real solutions to those problems in real time. 9600K TDP. How many watts? 95 watt. All right, well, it's a 100 watt TDP heatsink and a 95 watt TDP CPU. So we're going to test that to see if that's real. Obviously, under a normal workload, it won't be a problem. It's only if we're really creating, a workload for the system like Prime 95. Benchmark testing and simulations are typically the most stress most people put on their computer in regular, normal usage. Most people, the vast majority of people, will never stress their computer out in the way that a benchmark will. A benchmark is just not a realistic view of how the computer is going to be used by most people. In much the same way, you can simulate a meal, but it'll have no taste and it won't fill you up. And if you want to run simulated meals all day, you'll probably die of starvation. But to each their own. Benchmarks do serve a place, but they tend to get, in my opinion, too much weighing on them that people use as judgment to determine their own happiness. I think the end user should determine their own happiness based on how the computer feels and responds to a human being and not to a benchmark. A human being's benchmark to me is far more valuable than a synthetic benchmark. But it's just the way I am. I prefer reality and I prefer practicality, and what matters is, in my opinion, reality. Simulations are just that. And I've never been in a simulation where I didn't realize I wasn't in a simulation. They're so barbaric. Maybe in 50 or 100 years' time, we can have a holodeck that can fool us, but right now they're pathetically a poor replacement for reality. So I just don't weigh too much. I don't put too much weight into the results of a benchmark personally. But some people just chase benchmarks, and that's primarily what they do with their computer. They don't actually use the computer for anything important. It's just something they do for entertainment. And they tend to be very active online. And if you were to just read their posts, you'd think this was something that was really mattered in reality. Again, in very few examples in my 30 plus years in the industry, have we ever allowed a benchmark to dictate whether or not our customer's happy. The customer will let you know. Gregory Howard contributes $20. He said, I had fun building it, check PayPal. He had fun building what? What did I miss? What did I miss? Can you repeat what that's in reference to, Gregory? Or maybe is it explained in PayPal? Maybe that's where the missing half of the story is. Apparently he built a computer and had fun, but I don't know what he built or when. Oh, wow. Gregory Howard sent a $100 PayPal contribution, but he doesn't say anything in it. Thomas Tidwell sends a $10 PayPal contribution. Well, thank you, Thomas. $10 from CareyHolzman Technology via PayPal. He says, here's a little commission sub for no link to Amazon. Thanks, it's a nice case. Hey, that's very nice of you. Thank you, CareyHolzman. And what generosity from Gregory Howard has been contributing rather frequently. Where have you been all my life? Thank you very much, Gregory. I'd love to hear the story of what you built. Can I call you Greg? Gregory sounds formal. Eileen Novak said, I'm a reformed benchmark chaser. Glad to hear that. Cloud said the stock cooler on an i5 13500 in GIS application make the CPU throttle and overheat. I've run the i5 through the heaviest benchmark I can throw at it. It's never overheated. So I would check your BIOS voltage settings. It sounds to me like you might be overvolting it, or the default from that motherboard manufacturer might be overvolting it. Check for a BIOS update, because I can tell you that CPU, the stock CPU fan that comes with the 13500, I can throw everything at it. It will not overheat. So it's something different, and it's probably related to your motherboard. If your motherboard is defaulting to a higher CPU voltage in order to eke out better performance, let's face it, some motherboard manufacturers have been caught essentially doing that so that they appear to be better motherboards and benchmarks. This is why too much faith in benchmarks. I can tell you, and I would challenge you to run that same software the same way that you use it on one of my builds with the 13500. And if you could make it overheat, I'll pay you $100 on one of my builds. That's how confident I am the stock cooler is more than adequate. But I also know boards I'm using, the latest BIOS. And if it is overheating, the first thing I do is check the default voltage settings in the BIOS if you haven't changed them, to see if the motherboard manufacturer artificially cranked them up and put them back where they should be. That'll probably solve your overheating problem. Sometimes people come to conclusions as though they're factual, when in fact it could be very much controlled by the motherboard maker, and that if you would have selected a different motherboard, you likely wouldn't have had this problem and you wouldn't know any different. And I've seen that more times than I can count lately. It's been a fad the last 2 years, 2 or 3 years, that motherboard manufacturers have been sneaking in higher voltages so that when people run their benchmarks against the competitors, their board runs better. But if you look at those details, it'll explain, in theory, the same board with, or the same chipset based board running the same processor should get exactly the same benchmarks. And so if the benchmarks are falling markedly lower or higher than another manufacturer, it's likely BIOS settings that manufacturer has different default values to. So just so you know. Now, of course, you can always put a more aggressive cooler, put a Mugen 5 on it, put an all-in-one in there. That's still solving the problem, but I don't think you're quite understanding the cause of the problem. But there's multiple ways to deal with it. So, any event, there's always exceptions. Maybe you've got a board that's running at stock voltage and it's running hot, or maybe your heatsink's not seated right. Maybe you didn't build it exactly right. Until I see it with my own eyes, we all make mistakes. We all sometimes need a second set of eyes to notice things. I'm not paid by Intel. I have no reason to make stuff up. And I've run the tests live. And you can go back and watch my 13500 builds. I've run Prime 95 on it. I think I ran it a half an hour. Didn't even come close to overheating. So, and I've done that multiple times. I've got 4 13500 builds. So if it was just one build that was not running hot and the rest were, or the opposite, I'd see it. But it's been consistent. I don't know what to tell you. But what I found in my career is when a customer, and again, this is a generalization, when a customer is blaming the technology, it's almost always something on the customer's side that's causing it, not the technology. And when a customer blames themselves, right? When they say, look, I don't know much about computers, I'm sure I screwed it up. In most cases, they did nothing wrong. It's weird, but the people who are the most tech confident are the ones who are blind to their own self-created issues. In my experience, again, not all of them, but it's weird because to me, if those people that weren't tech confident, that were sure they must have done something wrong, switched places, then everybody'd be right, like 100%. But instead, there's this weird flip-flop where the people who are just not confident think they must have done something to cause the problem. And in most cases, in my experience, they didn't do anything wrong. And the tech confident people that are sure something's wrong with their hardware, there's some shortcoming. The shortcoming is usually, not always, the shortcoming is with them. So I think it's important that you ground yourself in that if you think the technology is the problem, then answer the question as to why. What's different about your build than the ones I do? Start there, start looking for those differences. And I think there's information that can answer this where you don't have to make assumptions. But that's just my suggestion. How you choose to go about your conclusions and blame is, your freedom to pick. But for me to stay in business, I have to solve problems, and I can't kind of wash my hands of something and walk away from it unfixed or without an explanation. Sometimes you can get away without an explanation. It depends what it is. If it's an ongoing problem, though, the only way we're ever going to solve an ongoing problem is to determine the actual verifiable root cause so we can repeat the problem. then we know how to fix it. And we know how to fix it from that point forward. So again, just trying to help, not trying to make you feel bad or anything else. I'm encouraging you to, especially if you're very tech confident, be a little less tech confident and you'll be a better tech. Rob Warren said, watching your videos pushed me to become a PC builder. Now I've been doing it 15 years nearly. Thank you for your videos and your advice through your videos. Keep up the great work. That's awesome, Rob. I'm glad to hear that. Eileen said she would drive herself to distraction searching for an exact cause. It's senseless. Well, it's not senseless if you do this for a living, right? When you're able to determine an exact cause, that means anytime you see that problem in the future, you'll immediately be able to fix it. And people are amazed. They go, oh my gosh, how did you get so smart? Like they'll give you credit for being smart when all you've done is had an experience that you sought out the root cause for. So every time you see that again, and because you searched hard for it, it's going to stick with you. You know, if it's an easy fix, you'll forget, what did I do to fix that? But if you fight for it, if it's a struggle, then that's a fix that sticks with you. And if your career is a technician, then that can come back to benefit you in the sense that people get impressed with your skill, when really it's just nothing more than experience. Did I take the, oh, I did take it out. Okay, so let's go ahead and put the IO shield in. You know, this is the main driving force behind why I make videos. YouTube is filled with hobbyists and enthusiasts, and they only have a hobbyist and enthusiast perspective. And I really feel like the professional perspective is grossly missing from this platform, from the internet in general. And so I'm just trying to bridge that gap to help broaden people's horizons who choose to. Some people will just say, how dare you try and broaden my horizons? Hey, you know, I tried. Gregory Howard with a $5 super chat said he built the same computer for his daughter with an MSI 470 ITX motherboard. She put it in a backpack and took it to California. Oh, you built with this case? That's cool. And building in an ITX case is going to be always a challenge because, again, you're dealing in really tight spaces. Your motherboard is going to have stuff shifted around in untraditional places when you're accustomed to standards in micro ATX and ATX. But very capable machines when it's all said and done. All right, let's see if I can get this IO shield in here. I think, which way is this got to go? Motherboard's going to go in this way. I almost put this in backwards. Normally, the 3 small holes for the speakers, your audio, generally go towards the bottom of the case. Again, mini ITX, they move things around. So these have to go towards the top on this design. Now, if I would have put it in backwards, it's not a big deal. I just have to pop it out and turn it around. I'd realize that the minute I go to install the motherboard, the ports aren't aligning with the holes in the IO shield. And then I'd have to just take the board back out. I obviously wouldn't be able to secure the board in that way. So it would just be setting it in and dry fitting it and say, oh, I got to turn the IO shield around. But with this design, the board's going to go in this way, right? Because this is the motherboard tray back here. So the board's going to go in like that, and that means our audio is going to be at the top. So we should be good to go there. Now, I definitely want to put the heatsink on now. It's going to be way easier to deal with that than trying to do it later. It does look like we have a large cutout here to make that easier, but it's never easier than when it's completely out of the case. I've never used this cooler before, so I'm very unfamiliar with its mounting technique. We'll figure that out together. So let's see what it looks like here. We'll do the unboxing. So if you order one of these, you will understand how it should be packed. So we've got this piece of foam here on top. Looks like that. We have thermal compound already applied, and there's a little plastic cover that we have to open the cardboard up on the sides. Well, maybe not. But the plastic cover is really stuck in there. And that plastic cover is there to keep anything from touching the pre-applied thermal compound. So we're going to leave that protected. Also in the box, we have installation instructions. We have, I don't know, probably warranty, something we probably don't need to read. And we have the smallest bag ever of accessories. Geez, I wonder if that's even compatible with this socket. I didn't even check. Probably should check that before I go any further. Socket compatibility. Oh yeah, it says Intel 1700, 1200, 1150, 1151, 1155, and AMD AM5 and AMD AM4. We're covered. This is an H310, so I think that's, I'm surprised they don't include 1156 on there because that would be the same as well. I think that's an 1151 if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, we should be fine regardless of those little semantic details. Documentation. I like documentation like this. Good, clear photos. Just half of the backside. So looking here, it says for our Intel, we want a bracket that looks like that. And engraved on the bracket, it says upside. I like that because sometimes it's confusing as to which direction does the bracket go on. 180 degrees. And it looks like that bracket is going to secure 2 holes on each side of this heatsink. And it looks like when I push this down onto this plastic, I hit the thermal compound. Well, that doesn't hurt anything, but I think I'm not going to use that anymore. So we have 2 sets of brackets here. This one is labeled Intel 17 and 1800. This must be AMD, even though it's not labeled. Huh. So even though it says 17 and 1800, it also is compatible with 1200 and 1100. But it doesn't say as much here, but it does say in the instructions. In the AMD bracket here, doesn't say AMD on it at all. So the AMD bracket we don't use. Matthew Burden said it's his daughter's 18th birthday, which is making him feel old. I remember when my best friend's daughter turned 18. And I think she had a kid before she was 19. So that made him a grandfather at the age of 41. And he and I were the same age. I'm actually 6 months older than him. So when he said that he was a grandfather, that means I could have been well, it's way too young to be a grandfather. So all I'm trying to tell you, Matthew, is as long, if you think you feel old now, wait till you become a grandfather. If that makes you feel any better. All right, let's see. This says upside, so that'll go there. This one will go here. And they give us a little wrench. Isn't that cute? It's a nice touch. All right, what screws do we use? They want us to use a little socket. Where is it? Really? A socket and a nut. So to give you an idea, let me just bring these together and I'll walk it up to the camera for you guys. That's weird. All right, so what we have is a little, like a little standoff here. And it's got a nut that's going to screw on the other side, and it's going to go through that bracket. And the angles on the nut and the angles on the other side are going to lock it into the recess on the bracket to prevent it from spinning so we can tighten it down. So on the bracket, it shows that it wants us to put this piece in. And for a socket 1100, this is going to go towards the middle. Again, I'll bring this up close so you can see. But that piece right there, that screw, fits in, and it can be placed in this position, or it can be moved up to that position. And that's the difference between the sockets. I knew I was going to drop. And then it's recessed, and that's what's going to hold that in position while we tighten the nut on the other side. It's not recessed on this side, so that's why they included that wrench to get up underneath there to tighten it. Now, obviously, we'll put these on first, so that way we can have free rein to tighten that, and then we'll attach it second. Well, I go grab that piece that I just dropped, but it's a black screw that landed on white tile, so very easy to find. It's right here. Okay. And it's important you don't put it on backwards. They do show that this piece goes on the upside. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just start the nut. This would be way easier than trying to do this after it's screwed down to the heatsink. I've not seen an install like this before. Companies need to come up with their own install processes, or they get sued for royalties from companies like RAIJINTEK that hold patents on installation processes. And that means part of your profits have to go to that company unless you come up with your own way. And as far as I'm concerned, RAIJINTEK does it the best. However, the way Mugen Scythe has done it has been pretty clever. And who knows, maybe this Be Quiet way is also very clever. We use the included wrench and we can tighten that down. The wrench is bent at an upward angle, so when this is secured down, you can get up underneath of it, tighten it. So we're going to have to put 2 on each bracket for a total of 4. So this is step 1. They do want you to do this before you attach it to the bottom of the heatsink. Although I am a little concerned of how I'm... Oh, we must have to screw it in from the other side of the motherboard. I was going to say, how am I going to get a screwdriver through the heatsink to tighten it? But my guess is we're going to come in from the back side and tighten the heatsink down from the opposite side of the board. That makes sense. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm making assumptions right now. I can't imagine it's going to be done any other way, though. So that's 1 completed. And then we're going to use these, no, not these. We're going to use these flush screws here, flathead flush screws, to secure the bracket onto the bottom of the heatsink. Okay, that one's done. Now we do the same exact thing all over again with the other bracket. Sergio Cochet says, don't lose that wrench. Oh, I've got plenty of tools that'll get up under there. That's not a big deal. But I always put all the spare parts in the motherboard box with the systems that I sell. That way, if a customer wants to take that heatsink off and maybe repurpose it in an AMD build, they have all the brackets to do that. I imagine you could probably reach out to Be Quiet. They're a smaller size company. If you did lose it, they'd probably send you another one. Unless it's like 5 years from now, they don't make it anymore. I'm also making sure that when I put these in, I'm putting them in towards the lower side of this. It's an oblong slot where, as I mentioned before, this little, what are they calling this piece? An Intel fastening screw can be in one of two different positions, and we want it in the position at the bottom or towards the center of the bracket, not towards the edge. We want it towards the edge if we're doing socket 1700. This is an older board. All right, did I lose my wrench? Just kidding. It'd be nice if this part was already done for us by the manufacturer, but whatever. Once again, we make sure that the upside is on the upside that we can see it. It's important that that is angled away from the cooler or it's not going to fasten correctly, and then you're going to complain it doesn't cool your CPU properly. But you didn't install it right. Yeah, so I imagine these last 4 screws here that have little shoulders go through the board, through the back side, and they're going to tighten in like so and squish the cooler to the board. Interesting. So I wonder if this cutout on the back of the case is big enough for that. I'm going to go ahead and do everything while we're outside of the case, but it'll be interesting to just look and see if that's been accounted for in the case design. Because different motherboards from AMD and Intel that are M-ITX may slightly have the CPU moved a bit. Sometimes these holes that are cut out only give you access to half of the CPU, at least on regular cases. I imagine the same can hold true for mini ITX cases. I've only built about a half dozen, maybe 10 mini ITX builds in my career. So I don't have a lot of experience with them, not as much as regular ATX and micro ATX boards to see patterns. Okay, so that, yeah, it does show that that's exactly what we're going to do. But I want to clean that CPU cover off, CPU heat shield off. And the back page is AMD, so we won't use the back page at all. It's just, you're either going to follow this half of a page for Intel installation, or this half of the page for AMD. It's literally 4 steps. I will give it to Be Quiet for the simplicity of the design that you only need 4 steps. Some third-party coolers will have you do all kinds of jumping through hoops. You've seen me struggle with some third-party coolers before. This obviously, at least so far, has not been a struggle. Now, as to whether or not it's going to be adequate to keep that chip cool, well, we're going to find that out in real life by using Prime 95 and just seeing how it does. So let me grab my isopropyl alcohol and my Q-tips, get that CPU, top of that CPU cleaned off. It's a lot of dust on it. It's been sitting around for a while. The good thing about systems that are small like this is they're a lot cheaper for me to ship them. The downside is, for the owner, you're going to be very limited in what you can upgrade. But as long as you like USB, you can pretty much add whatever you want through USB. More storage, And with the network, you could put this on a NAS, have a NAS on your network and use that for more storage. You could put one GPU in here that's 2-slot wide, as long as your power supply has enough power to power it. And that's about the extent of your upgrades. You only have 2 RAM slots on M-ITX boards, so we've fully populated both, which means any RAM upgrade would require taking those 2 out and putting 2 of a double the size back in there. So if those are 2 8s, you could replace them with 2 16s or 2 32s. What are those anyway? Are those 8s or 16s? They're probably 2 8s. This RAM was built in September of 2018, and it's September 2023. This RAM is 5 years old. It's DDR4 3600, and each stick is 8 gigs for a total of 16. Okay, so it's well burned in. It's well-tested RAM, that's what we'll say. Now, with the top of that, the alcohol, you'll notice I don't dry it. The alcohol evaporates. When we go to put this cooler on, I want the power cable. I don't want the power cable to wrap around the cooler. I want the power cable to come out in the direction that makes it the shortest run possible to the CPU fan header, which is here on the motherboard. So I want that power cable to come out this side, but I also have to make sure that these screws are going to align with the mounting holes, but I think we're going to be okay. Otherwise, I may have to turn it 90 degrees and run the cable a short distance, but we don't want to wrap the cable around, and we don't want the possibility of the cable ever falling into the fan. So let me just see if this will align correctly. I think what I need to do is put one of these screws right here through the backside of the board. So again, we've got the 4 holes back here. We'll put that through one of them. Yeah, this is going to be a little bit tricky. I suppose if the motherboard were already mounted in the case, that would make it a little easier, assuming that the hole here is aligned properly, that we would have room to access the screws. And as you can see, the mounting holes are pretty distant from the CPU. So if that hole is big enough, it'll just be big enough. So I'm going to stick with my original plan and just try and get this installed while the motherboard's outside of the case. I might regret it. So first of all, it's a nice fit. It's going to look good there. What's interesting is it says be quiet on the sides you can't see. It says be quiet on the left and right side. I don't know if orientation matters. Didn't even look at that detail. It does show, according to this picture, it shows the fins of the radiator being on the left and right, which would mean we'd want to rotate that either this way or this way. Which way makes more sense? This way or this way? Run the cable around the back. Yeah, I think that's the way to do it. Put it on that way. So that way you can see the be quiet written there, and the fins are more in line with the airflow that's going to be going this way. Makes sense. Although this fan sort of supersedes that and it's going to push air down. Now, the tricky part is how I'm going to hold that in place while I get the screws started. Okay, one screw is started, do the opposite corner, and then the other two holes should automatically align, and I won't need to hold it. So now I can set the board right onto the heatsink and put these last two in. These last two holes will automatically be aligned for us. That's a really nice install. I like it. And I'm not just saying that because Be Quiet sent us the product for free. I genuinely think that's pretty difficult to screw up or misunderstand the instructions. It's pretty straightforward and pretty obvious. And I might have tightened these a little too much. Let me loosen it up a little bit. If you do tighten the screws too much, it'll put the heatsink on an angle, and then the mount point for the screw won't line up. There it goes. That's all I had to do was loosen those. So now we want to tighten these down and just pick a corner, start turning them, and do opposite corners, a few turns at a time. Now this one I can go ahead and tighten all the way down. Doesn't go any further, it comes to a dead stop. Do the opposite corner, comes to a dead stop. Next corner, dead stop. Final corner. You definitely want to turn these by hand. You don't want to use an electric driver. And we're going to go back over one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4. Perfect. Bring this back around. That's what it's going to look like. This cable that's going to power our fan is going to go on to this fan header right there. And this is a good time for us to then get a zip tie out and tie up the excess, because once it's in the case, that'll be near impossible to do. So this is the time to take care of this one bit of cable management right now. And all I want to do is fold the cable in on itself. Try and keep it as straight as possible so it's not twisted, for a cleaner look. And then just grab a zip tie. And you know what? They gave us 2 zip ties with the case. These will work. There's one, and I'll put another one at this end. And in theory, you won't even see this cable once once the motherboard's put in the case, because it's going to be all the way to the back and between the VRM heatsink and the CPU heatsink, and it's black, so it's just going to blend in with the VRM heatsink that's black and the CPU heatsink that's also black. Just going to blend right in. Cut the pigtails off. And now our motherboard is fully prepped because we already had the RAM and storage. Even the operating system's been installed. And it seems to me I had hooked this up a week or 2 ago to get updates, so we shouldn't even be missing many updates. I likely have Windows 10 on it, but it would take Windows 11 just fine if we wanted Windows 11. All right, so the next question is, what's the best way to mount the board? It does appear that we can take the motherboard tray out. It looks like 2 screws here. Not quite sure how we'd get to this side. My preference, once again, is I don't want to remove any of the hardware. I'd prefer to work within the case, which is always going to be a challenge, as I've already mentioned numerous times with mini ITX builds. Umbilicals will get out of the way. CPU power cables, which are the only cables we're going to need on this build. I won't be using any of the SATA cables, or will I? I might need to hook up a SATA cable for the RGB on the fan. Just cross that bridge when we get to it, I guess. This tie is being difficult, so I'll just cut it off. How about that? So we're going to grab the two power cables that are the non-modular cables. Oh, there's three. Oh, they've given us power supply. I'm sorry, graphics card power. GPU power is also not modular. That's weird. You'd think that not everybody's going to use this. Usually on a semi-modular, you just have CPU power and motherboard power as your permanent cables, and everything else you can add or remove. That's an unusual choice, but I guess it would be convenient if you did want to put a graphics card in here, but you've already got the cable, assuming a 550 watt power supply. 550 watts will be enough to power your GPU and your system, depending on what level of GPU you buy. Weird choice that the manufacturer made there. So looking at the fan, it looks like we have a typical fan header and a Molex, an old school Molex power connector for the RGB. And then that raw exposed button that has no fascia. It's just a, oh, that's an on and off button. That doesn't even cycle your RGB colors. It looks like you have no control over the RGB color. This is a push on, push off button. So that's clearly got to just turn the RGB on or off. That's all it can do. Fascinating. It also appears that the Molex connector is optional because the Molex connector is paired into the fan header. So you use one or the other. If you use the Molex connector, that fan's going to run 100% full speed at all times. It's on or off. It has no control over the fan speed. If you want the fan to speed up and slow down as needed, you'll want to use the 3-pin connector, assuming you've got a 3-pin connector available for fans on your M-ITX board. Because the boards are so small, you usually get at least one fan connector, but yeah, we've got a system fan header right here, the CPU fan header here, and that's all she wrote. Well, it's a good thing we only have one fan then. Otherwise, we'd have to get a fan splitter or a fan controller. Yeah, we just have system fan right there. Perfect, that's all we need. All right, so let me get I'm just trying to get all these cables out of my way. I don't want to trap anything under the board. And then you'll see I'm always picking up the board by the heat sink. I'm not touching any of the components. I'm not touching anything that's silver, you know, none of the circuitry, because I'm not wearing an anti-static wrist strap. And as long as I'm not touching any of the components, then I don't need to wear an anti-static wrist strap. All right, this is going to be a tight. Oh, holy cow. Wow. Okay, note to self, it would have been a lot easier to put the board in first and the heatsink in and the power supply in second. Between the power supply and the fan, they're eating up room this way and this way. And the board will not fit straight down. You have to put the board in IO shield first, or IO ports first, on a sharp angle and get it underneath the fan. And then it can move in this way enough to get around the power supply. So if you're going to build in this case, take it from your Uncle Carey, put your motherboard in before you put your power supply in. unless you want to work harder, which is quite often the way I work. Um, we want to make sure that our I/O shield is going to line up with the ports, or the other way around. The ports align with the I/O shield. And we also want to make sure that none of the grounding straps get caught underneath. Sometimes a grounding strap can get down inside of your USB ports or your Ethernet port, which this one was getting ready to go inside of the Ethernet port. And that grounds out the connections in the port. It could smoke your board, and it'll make it near impossible for you to plug anything in. And then that's when people realize they've got a grounding strap in there. And the only way to really fix that properly, take the board back out, bend that strap back up. Some people will try and be lazy and bend the strap outwards, out towards this way. And then it becomes like a cutting hazard. It fixes the problem for you, but at the same time, like even if you take some wire snippers and snip that little strap off, it'll be like a razor blade anytime you run your skin up against it. So it's always best to have that folded and not cut towards the inside and not the outside. Some people are like, man, I don't want to take that back out. I'm telling you, take your time. If it means you have to take it back out to do it right, do it right. And then you only have to do it once. All right. So the I/O shield is lined up. Let me just take another look here to make sure I don't have any grounding straps in the way. It's clean. That looks clean. The other place you can get the I/O strap caught is in the display port. And once again, if you're never plugging anything in the display port, you may not realize it. But you go to turn your system on and it doesn't boot. And you think, oh, I must have bad RAM or a bad CPU, when in fact, your grounding strap is stuck down inside your display port and is grounded out and shorted out your motherboard. In most cases, that doesn't permanently damage the board, but I've seen people completely pick the wrong components. They start blaming. Again, it's the overly confident, the person that's comfortable with tech, that's going to be the quickest to blame the wrong thing. So, look for the easy things first. And those grounding straps will get you every time. Ask me how I know. All right, so now we just need the motherboard to align with the standoffs. And then we find the screws in here that we're going to use to secure the board. These are the screws that come with the case. And we have this little speaker we could plug in if we want the beeps and the boops. We can add that optionally. You don't have to. These screws with the big rubber washers are for mounting hard drives. All right, so we have a number of different screws here. Which one do we use for the motherboard? Well, which one do we have 4 of? Looks like we have more than 4 of everything. Let's take a look at the documentation. And as it describes the included screws, it should tell us which ones are for the motherboard here. The very first one, which looks like a typical... Oh no, it's not a hex head, it's rounded. It's a round screw. Kind of looks like those. 1, 2, 3. Oh, no, they gave us more than 4 of these. 4, 5, 6. How many do we get? It says there's 8 of them. Really? Why did they get 8 when an ITX motherboard only takes 4? Well, let's make sure I'm looking at the right screw, because by the picture it looks right. That's 7. Should be one more in here somewhere. They're all black, and they all kind of look alike, but that would be 8. These other screws are for 2.5-inch hard drive installations. These typical hex head screws are for 3.5-inch drive installations. And these short screws that have flush heads, flat heads, these are also for 2.5-inch drive installations, depending on where you're installing them. Then these screws with the washers aren't mentioned at all for some reason. They're not included on this inventory sheet. They've included 2 nylon standoffs. Very specific. Do they show where these screws with the giant rubber washers go? Because that looks to me like 3.5-inch drive install. It does not identify or acknowledge the existence of those screws or where they are used. Interesting. Okay. Well, extra parts. What are you going to do? If you're new to building, do not use an electric driver to tighten screws. It's okay to use an electric driver to take them out. It can be very easy to cross-thread, and that's going to make a very bad day for you. So I recommend, if you're new to building, turn the screws by hand. I'm looking right now to see where my CPU power connector is. Guess I'll be okay to get that. It's going to be a tight fit like it always is on ATX cases. You get that CPU power connector on. Might be something you want to connect before you put the board in, but that may make putting your board in more difficult being tethered to the cable. Being not tethered to the cable makes the board go in easier, but can make the power supply cable harder to put on. Pick your poison, I guess. So my magnet keeps pulling the screwdriver into the power supply. So I'll be turning this one by hand after all. It's pretty narrow and dark down there too. It's really hard to see. Let's grab my flashlight here. Yeah, even this screwdriver can really reach that. And then we should have one more way down in this corner. How am I supposed to get to that with the fan in the way? Oh, it's not. It's in front of the fan, not behind it. Or it's behind the fan and not in front of it. We're fine. And these are the right screws, so that answers that little question. Fit perfectly and tighten up just fine. Now that I've got all 4 screws started, now I'll tighten them. The order that you tighten them, you don't have to do opposite corners. That's really only important for the heat sink. Cannot see. It's way better. Never build an ITX computer in a hurry, because it will affect the quality of your build. I'm running into an issue where the base of where this bit fits into the screwdriver is hitting the edge of the power connector. So I'm afraid I'm not quite getting all the way in there. Let me try a different driver for this one screw. Okay, and those don't have to be super tight. They're just there to secure the board in place. So as long as it's not moving around, it's tight enough. Also keep in mind, if it's something you're going to be moving the computer around or shipping it, you definitely want those screws tight enough that they're not going to shake loose over shipment or movement. So don't over tighten them, but don't keep them too loose that they end up working themselves back out again. Now this cable here can go on to the fan header, which is of course, all the way across the other side of the board. Of course, they're going to put it all the way over there to make my cabling look as ugly as possible. Will just be a challenge for us to fix it later. And then the big motherboard power cable is going to go on right next to our RAM. So that's easy to put on right now. CPU power cable will be a little bit of a challenge here, because it's got to go right at the very bottom of the case. So you've got a little space between the edge of the heatsink and the bottom of the case. Sort of fit this through. It's not too bad, really. Line it, lock it in. Now, the rest of the cables is going to be the power supply, the power switch, the power LED, hard drive LED, USB, and front port audio. So just the umbilicals are all that remain. It's a pretty straightforward build. It's not too difficult. Right now, the cable management looks terrible, but we can clean that up. A couple of zip ties. We want to hide everything over here as much as possible. And then, you know, this rear case fan, it's got to plug in way over here. So we'll figure that out. We'll get creative on the cable management on this, just so that everything within the window will be clean of cables. You can have your cables a mess outside of the frame of the window. No one would know. All right, I've not been paying attention to the chat, so let me take a quick look in here. V Manor says usually screws type M3x5 for the board. I don't pay too much attention to the... in my experience, there is no normal for the board install. It varies from case manufacturer to case manufacturer. For the board, that's the heatsink. The board shows these screws are L6. That's why I say you can't, when it comes to mounting the motherboard, you want to use the screws that come with the case always. Don't take screws from a different case and make them fit. You'll likely strip something out. They'll be too wide, too thin, wrong thread pitch. You run into all kinds of weird problems. If you get lucky, maybe, but in my experience, there's no reason to need to get lucky. Keep all your screws together with the case so that in the future, when you want to make changes, you'll still have those screws. Because trying to find compatible screws, that can be a real challenge. Lugrinia says, just a small update. The Musitex build and the Ace Magician CK10 are still running flawlessly. Music to my ears. Martin wants to know if you can remove that fan to get more space. It would not be recommended since that's really the only fan you have. So yes, you could remove it, but if you mean just temporarily, while you're hooking up wires and then putting it back, yeah, everything here, as I mentioned, is all screwed together. I don't see any rivets. Literally every panel can come off. If you want to do that extra work, have at it. I choose not to. Now, as you can see from the cutout in the back, we would not have been able to attach the heatsink if we mounted the motherboard first. As you can see, two of the screws that hold the heatsink in on top of the CPU are here, and the other two are down here. That's what I was afraid of. This cutout didn't seem to be big enough to universally cover all the socket locations for different Intel and AMD chipsets. So even though they're still on a mini ITX board, that socket could be a little higher or a little more to the left or right on different motherboards based on different CPUs. As we can plainly see here, this cutout should have been far deeper. Not a big deal. It just means that if we ever have to pull that heatsink off, like let's say that this chip is running hot and that heatsink ain't cutting the mustard, then the whole board has to come out. And for the board to come out, we also have to unplug all the cables that we're plugging in now. Not that big of a deal, but kinda. If all they did was make this cutout an inch longer, half an inch longer, really. I'll meet them in the middle, 3/4 of an inch deeper, like right down to here. That other screw is right there, right where my finger is. Could I get a drill and drill a hole through it? I could, but then I'd have to make sure I got all the metal shavings up, because that could short out against the board. And it means anytime you change the board, and you will change the board, that likely won't align with the next board. So it's not like you only have to do that once and now you're going to not have this issue in the future. I guarantee you'll have that issue again, depending on which board you go with, Intel or AMD, and which chipset. All right, let me grab a colder Gatorade. If you have any questions for me, we'll take a little break right now before I hook up the last of the cables and test fire this. So this will be the time. If you've asked a question earlier and I haven't addressed it, it's because I haven't seen it. Please put your question in again at this time, and I'll do my best to provide an answer or direction for you to find the answer. Also, watch the chat room for answers. We have a lot of very smart people in our community who may offer you an answer better than mine. It's not that unusual. Consider all the answers. Paul Howe says, I cut the Molex cable off. You could, but then you're going to have bare wires that could short out. That's got voltage. And if it touches anything metal, poof. So you'd then, once you cut the wires off, you'd have to run some electrical tape or something. Or you could dismantle the connector and cut the wires off inside the connector and put the connector back on and not have to worry about the bare cables. Once again, when you run a professional business, that's not how you're going to run your business if you want to stay in business. If a customer finds you've cut their cables, you might find yourself owing that customer a replacement of whatever it was you cut. What you guys do at home to your own equipment, you want to cut corners and you want to do things, the expression is half-ass. It's not professional. But you don't have to be professional. It's your stuff. I do. I'm held to a higher standard than a home user. And if I don't live up to it, I go out of business. Andy Kane says, is this a socket 1200? Socket 1200 is 10th and 11th gen. And then 12th and 13th gen and 14th gen are socket 1700. This is a 9th gen, so this is a socket 1151, I believe. All right, let's take a look at Babar says, smoke test now? Not yet. We've got a few more cables. I just wanted to address any questions in the chat room as I take a break here for a minute before we hook up those last few cables, USB, power switch, power LED, hard drive LED, and the audio cable. There's all that's left. And then we can power it up. And then we can determine if that heatsink is going to be enough to keep this chip cool under duress. It'll be fine. I know it'll be fine under normal usage, but if you were to hammer on it, will that heatsink be enough for that CPU? According to the box being a 100 TDP heatsink, and according to the specs being a 95 watt TDP on the CPU, it's going to be close. But if we follow what the paperwork says, we should be fine, assuming we've installed it correctly. So right now, this is what it looks like. Like I said, it does get crowded in there. And for that reason, if it were me personally, I would want a mini ITX case that does not have a case window. Because if it has a case window, then the cable management, it's important that it looks right, you know? So if we did not have a case window on this side, wouldn't matter what the cabling looked like on the inside. But since people can see through it, well, that just makes the cable management a little bit more of a challenge and more important for the aesthetic. Okay, I don't see anything else I don't see any other questions. Again, I will remind you, if you have a question, I am taking a break right now to address any questions before we get back to work. Doc Mechanic says, does this have LEDs? What does this mean? When you say this, I have no idea what you're referring to. And LEDs for what? I don't understand your question. The fan is RGB, if that's what you're asking. And the case has a power LED. Do understand when you're communicating with me, I don't know what you're thinking. You have to verbalize or put into writing. You can't say this or that. I need to know what this or that is. Okay. All right, looks pretty quiet in there. So let's take a look at getting these last cables hooked up here. Shouldn't be too difficult. Again, it's the cable management where the challenge comes in. But just to plug the cables in, which is all we need to do at this stage, we've got our USB 3 header. That's going to go. Something has trapped my front port umbilicals. Is it the power supply or the motherboard that's pinching them? I was not careful enough. I seem to have pinched. Okay. They were just kind of stuck between the motherboard and the power supply. They're almost touching. They're so close together. So our power switch, hard drive LED, and power LED, where do these go? These can be a little bit of a challenge to hook up on a mini ITX case. Most of our cables are gonna go on the other side of this RAM. So you see where our power supply is, and you see where our red RAM is. The umbilicals, like the USB and the power switch, power LED, they go down into connectors between the red RAM and the black power supply, right in that little slot. So that's why I say it could be a little bit of a challenge. And I don't really know any easier way to do it. It's not like we don't get a lot of slack with this. And thankfully, you don't want a lot of slack, because otherwise that's a lot more cables to manage. And yeah, we've got 3 connectors that have to go on in that tight spot. And this was the same struggle I had with the train PC as well, was getting that particular set of connectors on. Looks like hard drive LED, power LED can go on first. And this may be a good time for forceps. once again, this would be a lot easier if the power supply was not installed. So I would say if I were building in this case, I would put my heatsink on the board first, which we did correctly. Then I would put the board in second. Then I would run the front port umbilicals to the board. And then I would put the power supply up. This is sort of the last thing, because this power supply is really in our way. If this power supply was not in, putting these cables on would be super easy because I could get my hand in the area the power supply is in. It's not impossible. It's just more difficult than it really needs to be. And not a big deal to pull the power supply out. See if we can do this with forceps first. And removing the power supply will be sort of a last ditch option. These may be too big. Okay, so hard drive LED. Not even sure that's really the right one to start with here. That was almost too easy. Let me get a flashlight and make sure I put it on the right set of pins. Sure looks like I got it right. Now the power LED is going to be a little bit trickier. I almost feel like I need to start with the power LED because that's two individual cables. And they only give us about an inch of slack, and then after that inch, all the cables are stuck together. And we could pull them apart more, but then it makes the cabling look ugly when it comes time to cleaning up our cable management. So, really feel like I need to take that power supply out. What a shame that that's, where they locate these front port umbilicals. If they were on any other side of the board, it'd be much easier to get to. Definitely doing this the hard way. I appreciate a challenge, though. This would be so much easier if I just took the power supply out. It'd be nothing. I feel like I could totally do it with these forceps. And maybe if I wasn't live on camera and I'm just, messing about, I could spend as much time as I want to on it, but I feel like you're judging me. So let me just go ahead and take the power supply out. It's just 4 screws anyway. The power supply doesn't have to come all the way out. It just needs to come far enough back that I can get my hand in there. That way I won't have to unplug anything as far as power supply cables go. Yeah, I'm going to take this foot off as well. Devil's in the details, you know. This has to come at the very end. So now I should be able to just lift the power supply out. That's pretty much all I need to do. Now I get my hands in there much easier. I just don't want to scratch up the case at all. Plug it from here. Set that down. Now I can much easier get my hands in there. Still hard to see in there though. It's very dark. So let me grab my flashlight. So the power positive LED, power negative LED goes on next to that. Then the hard drive LED can go on. Power switch, last connector. Times like this, I can really appreciate the NZXT connector. That it's one connector that hooks up your power switch, power LED, hard drive LED. Off by one. It's got to get moved over. Sometimes it looks like you're on 2 pins and you're really only on 1. And then that little speaker can go on. That goes between those cables we just plugged in and the RAM. That's even a much tighter fit. Speaker's optional, but why not? I mean, we've got it, we'll add it. Won't hurt anything to have it. Once again, I'm off by 1 pin. Seems to be par for the course for me. Speaker doesn't really follow positive or negative, but I'll go ahead and put the positive side on the positive pin. What else do I need to hook up? Well, I'm looking before I put the power supply back in. I think that's it. The USB 3 cable, that'll be easy to plug in. It's just those LEDs and power switch that's a tight fit on. And that's true on any mini ITX case, at least every one I've worked on. It's always difficult. I really struggled on the train build to get those hooked up. So this is a lot easier than that. Oh, we've been on over 2 hours already. Time flies when you're having fun. And now I think I can put the power supply back. So we've got our USB audio that still need to get hooked up, but those are much easier to access. Oopsie, it just slid out. One more. Okay, that wasn't too bad. Still have to put the foot back on it. And we've got our extension cable here to go on. So what can go back on? So again, we don't want to squish that down too tight. Yeah, so just the USB 3 header and the front port audio header, that all that remain. The USB 3 header just plugs in right here. It's very easy to access. But again, I cannot, once I get that connector in, I can't see anything. So I'm going to need to get some light in there. So much better when you can see. Okay, then finally, front port. I can appreciate they don't give us too much cable, but this looks like it's just going to reach. But it won't reach if I have to move around other cables. It'll actually be too short. It's got to have a clear path away from all the other cables, or it's not going to be long enough. Okay. Now it reaches. That is a mess of cables, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so that is our completed build and it's ready to be test fired. Is it going to work? Place your bets. Let's see if we know what we're doing. Talk a good game all day. Whether or not it turns on and boots into Windows, that's where your real test is. Now, in order for me to hook up to the capture card, I need to either go through the DVI or DisplayPort. So I'll use DisplayPort to HDMI. Right here, I've got a DisplayPort to HDMI adapter here. So we'll plug that in to the DisplayPort. I need a keyboard and a mouse. Voila. And we'll plug the keyboard into the USB ports up front to make sure our umbilicals are working. And I need, see, we need an Ethernet cable and we need to give it power. So Ethernet cable here. Then we need to hook up our HDMI cable here. And then we need a power cable here. Then I need to hit the switch on the power supply because I always keep the power supply switch off until I'm ready to turn it on. So under here, I can just feel for the switch and flip it. There. So you can see power button, power light comes on. Let's go over to our HDMI input. Let's get rid of me for a second. There's our power on self-test for the motherboard. We've got no RGB happening on this rear fan. Wonder why. Oh, because we have a switch. Remember I said there was that switch that was just hanging? It didn't have a fascia to it. So if we go back to camera 1 here, and I'll spin this way so you can see it. And I'll get my glasses so I can find that little micro switch. It's just hanging off a set of wires. Back in here somewhere. It's resting on top of the heatsink. Great. That's just great. Should be doing this with the power off. You know what? Let's turn it off. I'm not worried about hurting myself. I'm worried about damaging the fan. So let's wait for that to turn off and let me grab that switch. And it's not a momentary contact. It's going to be either on or off. So right now it's in the off position. I've just pushed it in and it's sitting now in a much shallower position. So now when I turn it back on, we likely will see RGB back here, maybe? Maybe not. Okay. Switch is doing nothing at all. The good news is the fans are quiet. Are they all turning? Yep, they're all turning. So with regards to the RGB, I wonder if maybe the motherboard's not outputting enough power for the RGB to light up. It's not important to me, but I'm just curious. Now, if we go back to this board and take a look at the specifications, we can verify the RAM and storage and everything we have in here. Mouse is working, so that means we hooked up our front USB correctly. Go to properties here. There's the i5 9600K, 16 gigs of RAM, 15.9 gig is usable because the onboard graphics card needs to borrow some memory. For Windows 10 Pro, 22H2. And for storage, we have what? It appears to be a 256 gig. I might switch that out for like a 1 terabyte. Prices have changed since this board was initially given to me, so 1 terabyte drives are much less expensive. We can clone this over and we can check for any updates here. It's the Security Center one. Protection, turn that on. Should keep that happy, and we'll go over to, I mean, it's a snappy system. Just because it's a 9th gen doesn't mean it's slow. Some people are just very demanding. And look, if you can afford to be demanding, all the power to you. You can save a lot of money getting a chip that's a couple generations old, that's still Windows 11 compatible, and much more affordable. Okay, so while that's installing, we'll go back over to camera 1. And again, I'll address whatever questions you might have here in the chat room. LRCX has joined us. Welcome in. What do I think the switch is for? I think the switch is for controlling the RGB on that fan. I think we're not getting enough voltage off of the motherboard. If we go in and change the motherboard to just putting the fan on full speed, maybe that's what it needs to get enough voltage to light those LEDs up. Or maybe we have to use the Molex connector in order to get the RGB working. You know what? Maybe I should look in the manual and see what it says. Doesn't mention it. It's just about hardware installation. Doesn't say a word about that rear fan or the connectors on that fan or the switch that's on that fan. Clear as mud. It's an easy enough thing to test, right? We can shut this back down, hook up one of the Molex connectors to the back of the power supply, right? Because we have those cables here, and temporarily plug it in. That likely means that fan's going to run full speed. But if it's that quiet, who cares? So we have SATA connections, graphics card connections, more SATA, more GPU. I don't know why they give you so many. Get one cable with Molex connectors. So they're kind of going out of style. They kind of went out of style 15 years ago, but you know, what are you gonna do? So let's go back over to desktop here. We'll wait for that to finish and we'll shut the machine down, and then we'll plug this into the back of the power supply and into the fan. And we'll unplug the fan from the motherboard because we don't want both plugged in. We don't want to be sending voltage into the board other than where it's supposed to be sent into the board. That would be bad. The other thing we could do is we could go into the BIOS and change that fan header to be always on. That may be all it takes too. So we can do both. Actually, going into the BIOS would be the easier, faster thing. So once this finishes installing, we'll restart, go into the BIOS and take a look and see if we can set that fan header to be full on all the time. John wants to know if we can test the CPU heat idle in the BIOS. Well, yeah, I mean, we can look in the BIOS for reported temperatures. We can look for that, sure. Given how quiet everything is, I have to assume the CPU is running nice and cool. If the CPU were running hot, I would expect those fans to be turning faster and therefore making more noise. That's what I would expect. It doesn't necessarily mean that's what would happen, but that's typically a good sign when the fans are quiet that things are not overheating. This looks like it's a pretty big download here, so we'll just go ahead and wait for that to finish. In the meantime, we'll go back over here to camera 1, and I'll just put camera 1 in the corner so we can keep an eye on it. And if you have any questions, again, this will be the time to ask. If anyone's interested in buying this computer, reach out to me privately to my email address and see if we can work a deal. Essential Working Too Hard said, who needs RGB anyway? Well, it's nice to have as an option, right? For those who want it. If it's supposed to be there. Camera Girl says she needs to have RGB. Of course she does. So of course, this is going to be one of those updates that wants to take a while to expand before it installs, right? Because now I'm anxious to get this done. And this update's not this important to me. So let's just shut her down and handle that later. So we'll shut that down. And we'll go full screen on camera 1. Okay, so the first thing is, well, let's check the BIOS first. So let me go back to where it was. Let me put camera 1 back in the corner. Getting ahead of myself. And turn the machine back on. We'll get ready to hit delete. CPU is at 43 degrees Celsius. That's chilly. Okay, let's look under the fan header. Fan info. And we're on system fan, and I want system fan to be all the way on. Can I raise that to 12 volts? Is this how this works or no? Settings. It's not on smart fan. It shows it's a DC fan. That's correct. We have an all full speed option, but I don't want all full speed. I only want this one speed. Shows the system fan at 12 volts. It's where it should be for the RGB to work. With smart fan turned off, oh, smart fan should be turned on for the CPU. CPU should be PWM. Oh, the RGB just came on. That's interesting. All right, so we'll hit save and exit here. How do I save and exit? Close. Close. System fan 1 type has been switched to PWM. Yes. Okay, and so If we go back full screen on camera 1 now, you could see that fan is all lit up. And I imagine if I hit that little loose switch in there, that'll shut the RGB off. So here's our switch. That turns the RGB off. Hit the switch, RGB's on. So it was a setting in the BIOS. We don't need to hook up the other cable. Saves me a little work. I'm good with that. Be kind of curious how this heatsink's going to hold up against a Prime 95 torture test. Let's copy Prime 95 over. See here, here. See testing. Prime 95. W should be all. Oops. There. Take our flash drive back out. Bring up the hardware monitor first. For that update for right now. And we'll pay attention to port temps, which are we got our frequency, but where's our temps? I guess we just get a package temp, huh? Well, that's what we got. Well, we do have these temps here. Maybe it's in here. So let's start Prime 95 up. Let's start running. And then we can take this and get this on top. And we're at 3:44 p.m. So we'll let this run to 4:05. That'll give it a little more than 20 minutes. Unless it hits 86 degrees, in which case I will conclude that that heatsink's not quite good enough. But so far, everything's nice and chilly. We've already gotten up to 69 degrees Celsius. So this needs to be the temperature I need to keep my eye on right here. We'll keep an eye on that. The fans are dead quiet though. So far so good as far as noise levels go. It's whisper quiet. Ooh, climbing up there, 74. Still very reasonable temps right now. We have 11 more degrees of headroom before I get concerned, and 26 degrees of headroom before the GPU will throttle. Andy says software would probably change the colors of the RGB. No. In order for software to change the colors of the RGB, we would need an ARGB header, which did not exist at the time this motherboard was made. Furthermore, the fan doesn't offer it. Or the fan would need like a USB connection. It has neither. The fan literally only has a power connection and a power on-off switch. Therefore, the RGB is either on or off for this particular design, just so you know. Bikeman says, how often is it advisable to reboot my Comcast gateway modem router Wi-Fi device? System update shows 18 days, 8 hours, 6 minutes, and 10 seconds. In my opinion, you should only reboot your modem router when you're having problems. Otherwise, to reboot it unnecessarily could invite problems. So if you're running into issues with your internet connection, First thing I would do would be to unplug or turn off the modem router, wait a full minute, turn it back on, and give it the full 2 minutes to resynchronize with your internet service provider and see if that solves your problem. Otherwise, don't touch it. If it's not broken, leave it alone. If a power off within a certain period of time was required, it would be built in from the ISPs to reduce support calls, and it would handle that on a schedule. It's not automated because it shouldn't be restarted unless it needs to be restarted. John wants to know if I can open up the cores plus sign on the temps. Oh, did I miss that? Let me see. Oh, thank you. I totally missed that was there. We're looking good so far. We're only about 4 minutes into the test, though. We've got another 16 minutes to go. So for 17 minutes, I'll give it 21 minutes. So while we're waiting, if you have any questions. Yeah, this Be Quiet, this is the Pure Rock LP low profile. I guess LP stands for low profile CPU cooler. Seems like a very nice fit for this particular CPU and motherboard. And he says, do you think this cooler can handle this test? I don't know. That's why I'm running the test. If I already knew the answer, I wouldn't need to run the test. It's looking very promising, and I'm hopeful. But how I feel doesn't really matter. The end results are what matter. So we're going to find out and have the answer to your question definitively within the next 16 minutes or so. Jamie Munoz wants, he says, it's been a while since I watched. What is the ratio of Windows 11 to Windows 10 machines that you show on your YouTube channel? What will you do with that information? Why are you asking that question? That's a very strange question that doesn't make any sense to me. Given that Windows 10 and Windows 11 are essentially the same operating system with a different skin, I can't understand what benefit you would have by having an answer. I'm curious why you're asking that question. $209 people watching around the world right now as we're getting close to a 3-hour broadcast. And we're going to end this broadcast when the test results are done, one way or the other. Hopefully it'll pass with flying colors. We are about 7 minutes into the test, and we're going to let the test run another 15 minutes. Jamie says, I'm curious because I've been looking up Windows end of life and doing research. And when I watched 6 months ago, you were saying mostly Windows 10. It doesn't really matter. I said Windows 10 and Windows 11 are essentially the same operating system. Newer builds that I build will generally have Windows 11, just for the fact that a lot of people that want new builds want Windows 11. But Windows 10 end of life is still more than 2 years away. It doesn't make any sense to me why you would care about being ready for something that's that far away. Now, in the year 2025, if we're having this discussion, that would be very reasonable. But they're essentially the same operating system. So I don't see any incentive to going to Windows 11 if you already have Windows 10 until the year 2025. And I don't see any reason to downgrade Windows 11 to Windows 10 if you already have Windows 11, because it's essentially just Windows 10 with a different face. So whatever operating system you've got right now is fine. They're basically, it's like having a debate over, is that a half dozen eggs or is that 6 eggs? It's the same. So, but please watch the channel more often and you'll be able to see for yourself what the frequency is. As we approach 2025 and well into 2025, we will gradually be seeing more and more Windows 11, but being more than 2 years away from the end of life on Windows 10, that's ridiculous to be concerned about it this early on. So where are we? We've got about 9 minutes into the test. We've hit 80 degrees maximum temp, so we're still good, but we're only halfway through. Matt Zoloff is leaving. All right, well, thanks for joining us, Matt Zoloff. Good to see you, my friend. Ella Linda says, I'm watching you on my mini boss game PC, and it's working very well. Right on. Okay, that's 10 minutes right now. So we're officially halfway through the test, and 80 is our max temp so far. So we are sailing through. 5 degrees is a lot of headroom, and we're 20 degrees away from a throttle. So that's way far away. I think this is going to be just fine. But Prime 95 doesn't run the same tests. As time goes on, the tests change, and some of these tests generate more heat than others. So that's why I let it run the full 20 minutes. I used to run 15. Then I realized between 15 and 20 minutes, Prime 95 quite often puts its most intense tests, at least in my experience, on the system. And so I wasn't letting it run long enough. These benchmarks are very unrealistic. Nobody that I know in the real world works their computer this hard for this length of time. It's a preposterous test. But the reason I run it is I feel very confident that if it will pass this test, then when I send this to a customer, I can guarantee the customer will not have any heat issues. The customers simply don't use their computers at this level for this length of time. I know many of you think you do, but you don't. You really don't. There may be one person out in the audience, maybe. People talk a good game, but in most cases, if you're running into heat issues, it's likely something wrong with the configuration, or you've brought that on yourself through an overclock. So as a business person who has to warranty and support my equipment, I have to be in reality what end users really use their computers for and the types of problems that they will call for support. Nobody, well, it's pretty rare anybody calls with a heat issue, but I also run this test, and that more or less assures if it's going to pass this test, no customers are ever going to exceed that. None of you would exceed it either, quite frankly. Now, we're looking at 81 as a maximum, which is still pretty good. About 12 minutes in, got another 8 minutes to go. Bob R said this was a good build. Thank you. Well, thanks, Bob. This was just, I'm trying to get through all these motherboards I have prepped. They're just sitting and they're in the way and they're just depreciating in value. And I thought, let me just look up a cheap M-ITX case to put this older board in. You know, there's no sense buying a $200, $250 end case M1 to put an $80 or $200 board in, right? When you, I mean, the CPU is a $250 CPU. The board's probably $100. The RAM is probably $50. And the storage, you know, we could put a 1 terabyte in there for probably $60. Power supply is likely $60. The case is $60. Our operating system, we'll buy the license key from VIP CDK deals. We'll get that for about $17. And, you know, you end up with a very affordable machine. Now, granted, it's already 3 or 4 years old. And it probably, when it was built, I would have said it's an 8-year build. So it's about halfway through that 8-year cycle. But given how things have progressed, I have no doubts this thing has another 5 years in it, minimum, at a minimum, 5 years. Okay, so 13 minutes in, 14 minutes in. Still 81 is our maximum. We're still sailing fine. I want to thank the folks at Be Quiet for sending me the cooler. That's pure coincidence that they happened to send this for review and I just happened to need it. Timing couldn't have been better. That motherboard's been sitting for a couple of years. And if Be Quiet would have sent this 2 years ago, it likely would have been sitting until today anyway. So the timing on that's fantastic. Okay, Cordia's Technology says, good afternoon. I got a little busy and missed half the show. Did you receive my commission on PayPal for recommendation on the case? I did. I read that out loud, and thank you again for sending that. In fact, I'm going to check my email one more time since we're just sitting here waiting. And let's see if I missed anything. No, I think I got everybody. I'm just looking through some other messages here, but yeah, looks like I got everything. 3D Everything contributed $20 just now in Super Chat. Thank you for that, 3D Everything. And still at 81 degrees and 16 minutes into the test. I'm going to let it run for 21 minutes. That's going to take me to 4:05. It just now turned 4 o'clock here in the afternoon in Phoenix. And I appreciate you guys watching. Thank you to Camera Girl for the thumbnail and all the keywords and tags that are used in today's video. Thank you again to Be Quiet for sending the cooler. And thank you to all of my members, subscribers, everybody who's watching and, you know, contributing in that way. I appreciate each and every one of you, and those who financially contribute even more so, because that's how I can afford to buy the case and buy the power supply that we needed to complete this build. Well, I also had to buy the RAM and the storage. But thank you to Ryan in Nevada for sending the board and the CPU to us so that we could, you know, make something of it. Bull142 contributes $10. He said he's got his new computer that he bought for me all hooked up and he's watching today's video on it. Nice, that's great news. Thanks for the update. As I mentioned, I have a number of machines, a number of motherboards that are prepped. I've got a couple 10850Ks, a 10700K, a 10700 on ATX and on micro ATX boards. And I can put them in a variety of different cases with a variety of different power supplies. We can change the amount of RAM or storage. But if you want to buy the way they're built, they're discounted because they've been sitting for a couple of years. Like these 10th gen ones, these are boards Mitch and I prepped back in 21, I think, and they're just sitting. So if you're interested in making a purchase and you're in the United States, please reach out to me through my email address, and any negotiations are offered or offers will be handled privately, not here publicly during a video. And if we can work something out, then it'd be great. And if not, well, that's fine too. I just want to offer these machines to my viewers before I offer them to the public. Once I offer them to the public, they'll be gone within 24 hours. So I want to give people time to get an opportunity to have a piece of the channel, because I'd rather sell it to somebody who knows what it means than some stranger who's just looking for a bargain. And since it takes me about 3 days to get them all ready to ship or to sell, to put it in a case and get it all cable managed and updated, I can't do them all at the same time anyway. But throughout the entire month of September, I'll be going through these. And my goal will be that when October comes, they will all be gone. So if you're watching this video anytime in October 2023 or later, it's safe to assume they're all gone. Okay, Cordius Technology says another PayPal is on the way. Thanks again for all the educational video. Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you, K Cordius Technology. And thanks again to everybody who's contributed during today's video. We got 2 more minutes left on the test. We're sitting at 82 degrees Celsius. That's beautiful. Perfect. A shout out and a thank you one more time to those super chat contributions from Bull142, 3D Everything. Gregory Howard, thank you for your continued generosity. Gave $25 in super chat plus a PayPal contribution today. Jetski SX, thank you again. And Paul O'Brien, thank you, my friend. I appreciate you guys. You guys make this channel possible. Remember to get discounts on Windows and Office through our sponsored VIP CDK deals. Remember, $300 data recovery. There is no cheaper, better data recovery service on the planet. There is no higher rated data recovery service on the planet, at least on Yelp. And if you are foolish enough to have not made backups and you need data recovered, you won't find a better service at a better price. You won't find a worse service at a better price, to be quite frankly. The price and the service do not match. They'll give you $1,000 worth of service for $300. Like, in my opinion, they're charging way too little. And apparently nobody else in data recovery has been told, because they're all charging $1,200 plus. That's usually where they start. Whereas $300 data recovery is they start at $300. It's not even the same ballgame. So if you don't believe me, do your own research. Talk to anybody that's used them. They are amazing. And we'll do some interviews and some follow-ups with the folks over at $300 Data Recovery, because that whole process fascinates me. Mark Gaines contributes 10 pounds. Mark's joining us from Northern Ireland. Thank you, Mark. And Andy Kane with €2. He says, thanks for all your advice. Much appreciated. Well, right on. Thank you, Andy Kane. And I think we're about done with our test. It is now 4:05 my time. And let's take a look at our final numbers here. It appears our hottest temp has been 83 degrees Celsius. Now watch how fast the CPU will cool down when we stop Prime 95. Check this out. I'm going to go over here and drag this to the right. Test, stop. Now, as soon as I confirm to stop the test, watch these temperatures on this row. Now, they will almost instantly drop to half within seconds. Now, a liquid cooler might take a bit longer because the liquid takes longer to cool down. But it always fascinates me how quickly a CPU gets hot and how quickly a CPU can cool down. And let's go back to camera 1 and I will say my goodbyes. Thank you to everybody for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed today's content. This is the RAIJINTEK. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. It was purchased off Newegg. Amazon does have the silver version of this. It's about a $70 case, but it seems like it's a really good value for the money, in my opinion. Thanks to all my members and my friends in blue for helping to keep it civil in the chat room. Thank you for the super chats and the PayPal contributions from everybody helping to support the channel so I don't have to turn into a big media company. I don't want to be a media company. Media companies make commercials. I have no interest in doing that. And for everybody joining us on the live chat, thanks for participating. Those of you who participate in these videos by chatting with us will find the content far more enjoyable than the people who are just spectators who don't participate. That's like watching TV. This is communication both ways. And if you're new here, I encourage you to pop into the chat room and at least say hello, even if you're not a social person or you're shy. We have a very friendly community, and it's a great way to make new friends. We have a lot of people here in the chat. If you just watch the chat, where people quite often only see each other in my chat room and, hey, how you been? You know, and they catch up. It's really, really cool. There's no reason for you to not be a part of that. Everybody's welcome as long as you're nice. Ian McLeod says, can I have an iron brew, please? I think it's closer to you than it is to me. That's going to wrap it up for today's show. Thanks for watching. I'll see you all again tomorrow. We have a live show every Friday at 1 o'clock Pacific time. I'm not sure what I'm doing tomorrow. Maybe another build. Maybe a mini PC review. We'll have to wait and see. And on Monday, every Monday at 1 o'clock, there are videos that are hidden from the public. Those are for members only. Those people that have the gold badges with the numbers next to their name. These are people that pay $9.99 a month to support this channel. And for them, I make a video specifically that they're invited to. The public cannot watch these videos. And it's more intimate. We can hang out with each other. It's not as big of a crowd. And sometimes they get exclusive content, some diagnosis, some repairs. That's strictly for them. Although eventually I will probably edit it and post it publicly. But in the meantime, it's an incentive. It's my way of saying thank you to these folks from keeping me from having to be a media company. Can't stress enough how much I don't want to do that. Samuel Kowalski just contributed $1 in Super Chat. Thank you for that, Samuel. That's going to wrap it up for me for today. Thanks again to Camera Girl for the thumbnail in today's video. And again, to Be Quiet for the heatsink used in today's video. And to Ryan in Nevada for the motherboard and chip used in today's video. And to all of you used in today's video. That'll wrap it up for me. I'll see y'all again tomorrow, 1 p.m. Pacific time. Hope I catch you live in the chat room. Until then, bye for now. Trying to find an outro. Here's one that's called outro. I'll run that one.